FNAF 3 is, well, in a manner of speaking, it's one of the most important FNAF games. Originally set to be the end of a trilogy, FNAF 3 features what I would consider to be a much more streamlined story than its previous entry. Rather than giving us a bunch of new animatronics, there's only one new threat shown to us in this game, and all of the minigames are centered around the same singular point. In terms of sheer numbers, there's definitely less to FNAF 3 than there was to FNAF 2, but the things that we actually see in FNAF 3 are undoubtedly more important to the story as a whole than anything that we see in either of the previous entries. And naturally so, because, like I said, it was the end of the story. But then, FNAF 3 wasn't the end of the story. There were more games, some set earlier, some set later, and as a result, people have started to think differently about certain aspects of this game. Identities of certain characters have been called into question, thanks to characters being introduced in more recent games. So now, people are locked in a debate of Scott either making far more than only one retcon, or him planning further ahead than any of us have ever given him proper credit for. But we're a bit of a ways away before we're ready to start talking about that. We have plenty of other things to talk about first. Phone calls, animatronics, minigames, and even the identity of our Nightguard, in addition to all of the other theories that have spawned from this game. So, if you're excited to see me delve into FNAF 3 and the community's attempts at solving it, and if you want to see the inevitable sequel, be sure to like and subscribe. And with that, let's get started on Five Nights at Freddy's 3. The goal for this little series of mine was to look over the games in isolation first before delving into the rest of the game. And unfortunately, I don't think people liked how I did that last time. So this time, we're gonna do things a bit differently. Instead of alternating between going through the game in isolation and then isolating every single part of it night by night, we're gonna go through the entire game really fast first. This is more so for the casual fans who haven't obsessed over every single detail that these games have to offer. If you don't need a refresher on what happens in FNAF 3, go to the timestamp on screen to skip ahead. FNAF 3 takes place a few decades after the first two games, 30 years after the closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. By the start of the game, we've been working at the location of this game, Fazbear's Fright, for at least a little while.
Hey, glad you came back for another night. I promise it'll be a lot more interesting this time.
Fazbear's Fright is the horror attraction that we spend the duration of this game working at, based on the unsolved mysteries of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, including actual relics from the decades-old pizzeria. And as is the case for our friends over the phone in every other game of the series, Phone Dude here isn't exactly being truthful with us. At least, not yet. He tells us that things are going to be a lot more interesting tonight, but literally nothing happens on night one. You can't get attacked by literally anything on this night. Another thing that Phone Dude tells us is that we'll start seeing things if we don't keep the ventilation active, which is something that we'll dive into a bit deeper later. Apart from that, yeah, there's really nothing to talk about until night 2, where Phone Dude tells us that they found one. A real one.
Hey man, okay, I have some awesome news for you. We found one. A real one. Gotta go, man. Well, look, it's in there somewhere. I'm sure you'll see it. Okay, I'll leave you with some of this great audio that I found. Talk to you later, man.
And so, we're introduced to the most iconic villain in the history of Five Nights at Freddy's, Springtrap. Springtrap is the enemy throughout every single night of this game from this point on, the only one that can actually kill you. But there are more threats to deal with, namely, the phantom animatronics that only start attacking you on the same night that Springtrap shows up. Throughout the week, more and more phantoms show up to attack you, and Phone Dude, well, he kinda just leaves midway through the second night. And in his place, we're reintroduced to Ralph, in the form of old training tapes that Phone Dude found on the same day that he found Springtrap. In these training tapes, Ralph spends most of his time talking about the two suits that they have at this point in time, that specialize as both animatronic and suit, otherwise known as Springlock suits. If you're wondering why I'm emphasizing that there were two of them, stick around for the rest of the video. At first, he explains how employees are supposed to get into them. Then, the next day, he tells his employees that, should the Springlocks in the suit fail, they should go to the designated safe room to bleed out in private.
In the case that the Springlocks come loose while you are wearing a suit, please try to maneuver away from populated areas before bleeding out, as to not ruin the customer experience. As always, if there is ever an emergency, please go to the designated safe room. This room is hidden to customers invisible to animatronics, and is always off camera. As always, remember to smile. You are the face of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
The safe room is a room that isn't visible on any of the digital maps of the building, so not even the animatronics know that it's there. In addition to this, there are no cameras in the room. It's entirely unmonitored. Then, in the next recording, he tells employees that these classic suits have been deemed unsafe to wear by the company, and tells them to start wearing the temporary suits that were provided to them instead, and to deflect any questions about relevance. Then, on the next night, he warns employees that the safe room is exclusively reserved for equipment and/or other properties not currently being used, and that it shouldn't be used as a break room to lounge in. He also specifically notes that the Spring Bonnie animatronic has been noticeably moved at this time. Following this, on the very final night, Ralph abruptly tells employees that the safe room is being sealed away due to, quote, budget restrictions, and tells them not to mention anything about the safe room to anyone, including family, friends, and insurance representatives. While we're listening to all of these, our Nightguard is working at Fazbear's Fright, which burns down by the end of the game, destroying most of what was there. But taking a close look at the newspaper, Springtrap made his way through the fire. Speaking of Springtrap, let's pivot to talking about the post-night minigames we have. There are 5 of them in total. In the first 4, we control one of the Core 4 animatronics and follow Shadow Freddy as he lures us to a room that we're not allowed into. Then, when we try to walk away, William Afton comes charging out of the room and dismantles us. But on the 5th night, rather than controlling one of the animatronics, we're controlling the spirit of a dead child. We can now enter the safe room and scare William Afton hard enough to cause him to run into the Spring Bonnie suit, where the spring locks proceed to seize up and crush his body. And then, all of the spirits fade away, and you get the bad ending. Because, as it turns out, in these minigames, you can find secrets that lead you to other minigames that you can find throughout the nights. In these minigames, you find a cake and bring it to 4 crying children. Then in the final one, you can give a cake to one last child, who proceeds to put on a golden Freddy mask. And then, they and all the rest of the kids from the previous minigames fade away. And after doing this, if you watch William get springlocked again, this time you get the good ending, where all of the animatronic heads no longer have lights on. And that sums up the game itself. So, what were the popular theories around FNAF 3 at the time of its release? Some of the bigger ones were that William Afton was springlocked and stuck in the room for an entire 30 years before the events of FNAF 3. Another one was that the Golden Freddy spirit that we see in Happy as Day was the ringleader of the rest of the dead spirits, and the one that we control at the end of Follow Me. And one more was that the canon ending to the game involved all of the spirits moving on at the end of Happiest Day. And while some of the points of these theories still have some merit to them, after an entire decade of new context and new games, we've gotten a new perspective on this game entirely. So now, let's start digging into the game using that new context, and seeing what new theories start to form. And to start, I want to talk about when this game takes place. When it comes to when FNAF 3 takes place, we're directly given one piece of information. It's 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closes its doors. The issue is, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza has closed its doors more than once. We know of at least 3 different instances of it. Once in 1985, once in 1987, and once in whenever the hell FNAF 1 takes place. Generally, people assume that it's somewhere within the ballpark of 1989 to 1993. Which means that FNAF 3 takes place in one of the following years, 2015, 2017, or somewhere from 2019 to 2023. For a long time, one of the most common answers, or at least the one that I saw the most and personally believed in for a long time, was 2023. This stemmed from the belief that FNAF 1 took place in 1993, thanks to one of MatPat's first videos on FNAF. And honestly, in my mind, saying 30 years after the closing of Freddy Fazbear's kind of implies 30 years after the final closing of Freddy Fazbear's, which would be the FNAF 1 location. Then, a couple of years later, FNAF 6 seemed to further back this belief up when it gave us an audio log called HRY223, which most fans took as Henry 2023 for the longest time. They used this to say that, by the time of FNAF 6, it's 2023 or later, so FNAF 3 taking place in the year 2023 seemed more likely. Now, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that interpretation, honestly it's what I thought for the longest time, and I only changed my mind during the production of this video. I no longer believe that FNAF 3 takes place during 2023. I'm now a firm believer that it takes place in 2015, 30 years after the first closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza following the missing children's incident in 1985. And my reasoning for this comes from the survival logbook. If you've been around in the community for a while, then you've probably heard of this theory from one of a few different creators. Trust me, I was not dedicated enough to come up with this one on my own. It's time to talk about real value. In the survival logbook, there are a few pages with coupons on them. On one of the coupons that you can find on page 79, which saves $16, Mike writes, "For real value, see page 61. Real value is a term that more or less means the value of something after adjusting for inflation. And since these coupons are from years in the past, yeah, it would have a different value by the time of Mike writing in this logbook." But this immediately raises some flags. If there's an actual real value code put in here that's meant to be solvable, then Scott has to have known what the inflation rate would have been by the time that this book takes place. And since scottcawthon isn't capable of time travel, to our knowledge, then we're left with one of two options. Either Scott is guesstimating what the inflation rate would be for the future, which would defeat the purpose of this being a puzzle here, or, canonically, this logbook takes place either during or before 2017, the year that it came out in, which would have a direct implication on when FNAF 3 takes place, because the logbook and FNAF 3 take place more or less at the same time. The logbook opens up saying the following: "Welcome to the first day of your new exciting career. This journal was designed for you, Fazbear Entertainment's newest employee, to both welcome you and ensure you feel fulfilled and prepared during your first week on the job." This is a book that was literally being given to people during their first week working for Fazbear Entertainment. And considering the amounts of illustrations featuring Fazbear's Fright here, I fully believe that this was being given to people who were beginning to work at Fazbear's Fright. And as we know from the very first phone call of the game, the first night of FNAF 3 isn't our Nightguard's first night working at this place. So with that in mind, I think that Mike writes in the logbook throughout his first week working at Fazbear's Fright, and that FNAF 3's gameplay shows us his second week working at the establishment. So if this is the case, then FNAF 3 has to take place at the same time as the logbook, either during or before 2017. Which means that it doesn't take place 30 years after the FNAF 1 location closes. It's either 30 years after the MCI or 30 years after the DCI. I'm inclined to believe that it's 30 years after the MCI, since saying that it's 30 years after the closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza would be weird if it's not referencing either the first or last time that Freddy's closed. Not to mention, the first closing of Freddy's was a lot more impactful than the other two, considering the fact that the restaurants in FNAF 1 and FNAF 2 weren't open for nearly as long. There is, of course, more to this theory. You can use real value to solve when FNAF 1 would take place if you really want to take the time to go through everything in it, but I don't think this is the video for that. If you're interested in hearing more about real value as a whole, I'd recommend these videos from Candy Bunny and Immense Andrew, as these are the videos that I really learned about this from. For now, it's time to talk about the implications of everything that I said. See, for literally anything that I just said to be relevant to when FNAF 3 takes place, Mike has to be the Nightguard working at Fazbear's Fright in FNAF 3. Which brings me to the next topic of this video, the Fazbear's Fright Nightguard. Now, there's at least some level of debate on the Nightguard's identity in the first 3 Scott-era FNAF games. We're mostly sure by this point who we're playing as in the first 2 games, but FNAF 3 in particular has always had a much more involved conversation surrounding our playable character. A big part of the reasoning for this is because of a Fazbear Fright story titled What We Found, where we follow the story of a character named Hudson as he works at Fazbear's Fright. Now, I only just recently read this story for myself, and now that I've read it, I can say with utmost confidence that there's absolutely no chance in hell that Hudson is the playable character in the game. Because while it's true that Hudson works at Fazbear's Fright and deals with Springtrap, the similarities with him and the playable character end there. First of all, Hudson is made aware of Springtrap before his night shift. His friends hook Springtrap to a wall hours before Hudson's shift starts, and Hudson gets a pretty good look at him. Speaking of, yeah, they literally attach Springtrap to a wall. He doesn't actually move in this story at all, because all of the crazy things that happen in this story aren't even real. they're happening in Hudson's head. This includes when we see Springtrap moving around, when he gets grabbed by the actual physical animatronics that are in the building, when his old math teacher shows up and starts calling him stupid, when his old school bullies show up and give him a swirly, when his long-dead stepfather shows up and starts attacking him, and of course, when he gets assaulted by a group of floating mouths. You might have noticed that almost none of those things happen in FNAF 3. In fact, even the building is different. The story makes a deliberate note about how the phone system isn't set up yet in this building, which is very much so different. But the most substantial difference between Hudson and the playable character of FNAF 3 is that on the very same night that Springtrap shows up, Hudson dies. Hudson willingly runs into an oven and gets burned alive, which doesn't happen in FNAF 3, especially not on the first night that Springtrap shows up on. So factoring all of that in, no, Hudson is not the playable character in FNAF 3. It would go against just about everything that happens in his story. But if it's not Hudson, then who are the other options? Well, besides Mike, there's one character in particular that comes to mind. Henry Emily. Henry is an interesting option, but I kinda don't see it. The most compelling piece of evidence for this is the fact that we know that Fazbear's Fright and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place burned down. And since we know that Henry is the one that burnt down the pizza place to try and kill William and free the rest of the spirits, then it's reasonable to believe that he tried the same thing during FNAF 3. However, while it's an interesting and plausible connection, it could just as easily be applied if Henry is one of the people in charge of Fazbear's Fright, rather than the person working the night shift. Meanwhile, when it comes to Mike, we have multiple clues that lead to him being the Nightguard. On top of him being the one that used to own the logbook, we have imagery of Foxy as the one working as the Nightguard of Fazbear's Fright throughout the entire logbook, the animatronic that is the most connected to Mike thanks to the daytime segments of FNAF 4. On top of that, we have the end of Sister Location's custom night, where Mike literally says that he's going to find his father as Springtrap pops up on the screen.
Father, it's me, Michael. There is only one thing left for me to do now. I'm going to come find you. I'm going to come find you.
These points feel like they're honestly screaming at us that Mike is the one who works at Fazbear's Fright. And honestly, it's one of those theories that I can't understand the arguments against, no matter how hard I try. And believe me, I've tried to understand the other sides of the argument a lot. I just think that Mike makes infinitely more sense than any of his alternatives. Now that we're a few thousand words into the video, I can actually start talking about the things that we see in the game itself on a deeper level. Let's start with the phone calls. Last month, I more or less made an entire video dedicated to these phone calls where I went over most of the relevant information. So for the most part, this segment is going to be a response to a lot of the things that you all said in the previous video. And we're going to start with everything that I said about Ralph. Now, okay. In my last video, I had some choice words from Mr. Phone Guy here. I more or less said that he's kind of an evil piece of that you have all been brainwashed into thinking is a good person by the week before, and now community perception of him is entirely skewered. And an overwhelming majority of you disagreed with me, and the main reason I gather from the comments section is that he's not actually evil. He's just reading from a script and being forced to say these terrible things. Okay, look, I get it. Being a single father must suck. And we know that Ralph cares about his kid at the very least. So him maintaining a job with Fazbear Entertainment to try and make ends meet in 1985, despite how obviously evil the company is, I get it. I understand it. It's not something that he wants to do, but it's something that he has to do. So he reads off his silly little script while silently being very against everything that he has to say in order to maintain his job. I understand. And for that reason, Ralph is clear of the evil allegations in 1985. However, when Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closes its doors that same year and reopens in 1987, look who came right back, Ralph. And when it closes again in 1987 and reopens sometime in the 90s, look who came back once again, Ralph. If he was in a tough financial spot in 1985 and needed to work for Fazbear Entertainment to make ends meet, then that's fine. I get it. So then, why did he go back in 1987? It's been 2 years by this point. If he didn't have another job, then he wouldn't have made it that far. And he especially wouldn't have made it to the 90s to work at the FNAF 1 location. To me, this means that he wants to work at Freddy's. It's not like they pay well. He ends up taking the night shift in FNAF 1, and we know how poorly that pays. I refuse to believe that he's just taking this job because he has to, which means that he's taking it because he wants to. Ralph is continually choosing to work for Fazbear Entertainment. I have no reason to believe that he's doing this out of necessity after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closes the first time. So the fact that he's willingly continuing to choose to work for this company, in my mind, does make him lead toward the evil side of the spectrum. This doesn't mean that he's a terrible father, or that he's the worst person in the world, or that he's directly killing anyone, but I cannot call him a quote-unquote good guy in good faith with him repeatedly working for this company, location after location. Okay, now that the less important part of my response is out of the way, we need to talk about the whole point of my last video. If you saw it, you know that Caitlin and I came to a pretty absurd conclusion. That the original versions of the Core 4 animatronics from 1985 were spring-lock suits. And there was a lot of backlash about it. But by far, the most common point that people brought up when disagreeing with me was one of the very first thing that Ralph tells you in this game.
Right now we have two specially designed suits. Right now we have two specially designed suits. Two specially designed suits.
This is Ralph's fourth sentence in the entire game, and most of you assumed that I was just ignoring it because it would put a massive hole in my theory. And I get why you think that. You're totally fair to come to that conclusion, but that's not what I did. I am of the belief that both this voice call and the one that comes after are recorded in 1983, as these are the ones that go over how to actually use the suits, and that the rest of them are recorded in 1985, when the suits are no longer meant to be used. And I also think that between these 2 years, at some point, the number of specially designed suits jumps up from 2 to 6. And no, that's not a blind assumption that I'm making. It's actually the conclusion of everything else that I stated in that video. So let's go through it together. William Afton stuffed the dead children into the animatronics. This is something we all know happened, something we can all agree happened. But something that we've barely asked is how it happened, and more importantly, how he got away with it. We know that there's security camera footage of him luring children to a back room in an animatronic costume, but there's no footage of these kids ever being killed. These kids were never found and are presumed dead. Now, what I gather from this is that the children were brought into the room, but never left it. Because if there's security camera footage of them going into the room, then naturally there'd be security camera footage of them leaving the room too. But since there's not, I have to assume that they never left the room, which would mean that William Afton killed these children inside of the back room. Another thing that I have to assume is that, considering the children are only presumed dead, that there's no security camera footage of William actually murdering them. Which means that this back room has no security camera footage. I have no reason to believe that there was security camera footage that was deleted, because if there was, then the footage of William luring the kids back there in the first place would have also been deleted. So, William Afton lured children to a back room without security cameras and killed them in there. And in FNAF 3, we're told of a back room that intentionally has no security cameras in it, the safe room. So, case closed, right? William brought kids back to the safe room that only employees knew about and killed them back there. It's an open and shut case, except not really. Like I said, there's no security camera footage of the kids being brought out of the safe room, which means that not only were they killed in there, but the bodies were also hidden away in there. And we know that the bodies were hidden in the animatronics, which means the animatronics were also in the safe room, which, according to everything that we know, doesn't make any sense. We're told that the safe room is exclusively meant for equipment and or other properties not currently being used. But this is Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, so all of those animatronics should be in use. Why would they ever go unused? Well, as it turns out, there's one time where we hear about suits being taken out of commission in FNAF 3, after the spring locking incident. After what happens at a sister location, all of the classic suits are being retired to an appropriate location, while being looked at by technicians. I don't know about you, but a safe room that is literally meant for things not currently being used certainly sounds like an appropriate location for things to get recalled to. This becomes more likely when you consider the fact that employees are still being warned to not use the suits, which implies that they can still access the suits, hinting at their close proximity. So that would give us a reason for the classic suits to be brought to the safe room, since we know that they can't just wander in there on their own thanks to Follow Me. Now, let's recap everything that was just said. The MCI kids were all killed in the safe room. In addition to this, their bodies were also hidden in the safe room. This means that the Core 4 animatronics, at some point, had to be put into the safe room, since they can't walk in there on their own. The safe room is exclusively meant for animatronics not currently in use though, so there's not reason for them to ever be put in there unless they stopped being used. And in FNAF 3, we learn that the classic suits, which I'm understanding as spring lock suits, since this is happening after an accident involving the spring locks, were retired to an appropriate location, which means that they are no longer in use. Which would mean that the only time it would make sense for the Core 4 to be brought into the safe room would be if it happened while all of the other spring lock suits were taken out of commission as well. Which would mean that the Core 4 animatronics were also spring lock suits, and that between 1983 and 1985, the number of specially designed suits that function as both animatronic and suit jumped up from 2 to 6. This is my explanation, with as few assumptions as I could possibly make. That's just my interpretation of what these phone calls say. And you're free to disagree all you want, but don't say that I'm just ignoring evidence or something like that, because that's not at all what this is. Sorry, had to get that out of my system. Let's move on now, shall we? We've been talking about animatronics for a little while now, so why don't we talk about the new group of them introduced in FNAF 3 next? I've always found the Phantom animatronics to be particularly compelling additions to FNAF 3. To this day, we still haven't gotten much in the form of information about them. Even in the game, the only thing that we actually get told about them is that we'll start seeing spooky things if we let the vents go out.
Look, this place will give you the spooks, man, and if you let that ventilation go offline, then you'll start seeing some crazy stuff, man.
But I don't even think that that's talking about the Phantoms, honestly. The Phantoms don't appear when the vents go out. It's the other way around. Whenever you get jump scared by one, that's when the vents go out. So I don't think that Phone Dude is talking about them here. But then, like, what the hell else would Phone Dude be seeing here? I don't know. It's probably just another example of scottcawthon saying something stupid on a phone call again. Not the first time he's done that. Glaring at his use of Summer Job in FNAF 2. Anyway, the only other thing that we really know about the Phantoms is that they are, in some way, shape, or form, associated with Springtrap. They only start to show up once Springtrap is in the building in FNAF 3. And in what we found, Hudson's hallucinations only start once he starts getting close to Springtrap. But apart from that connection, we've kinda got nothing. And that's really such a shame. I mean, we've never seen anything like them before in a FNAF game. I mean, animatronics that don't seem to physically be there, but project themselves into your view, only attacking you if you stare at them for too long. We've literally never seen anything like that before. Wait, what? Yeah, so as it turns out, literally everything about how the Phantoms act in this game is exactly like how Golden Freddy acts in every single game that we've seen him in. And sorry, but there's no way that that's just a coincidence. Every single version of Golden Freddy has had this exact same gameplay mechanic. You stare at him for too long, he gets you. Am I supposed to believe that an entire set of animatronics doing the same thing as him isn't relevant? That can't be correct. There has to be something there. I think that the Phantoms are connected to Golden Freddy, or more specifically, to Golden Freddy's vengeful spirit. Let's take it from the top. Where do the Phantoms come from? I can see 3 options. Including my theory that they come from the vengeful spirit, the other 2 options are the memorabilia inside of Fazbear's Fright and William Afton himself. I don't think that they're coming from Afton, because if they were, then why aren't the Phantoms there with him in FNAF 6? He is actively trying to get us for that entire game, just like he is in FNAF 3. So why would he not be using the phantoms again if he's capable of it? And it's not like their mechanic just wouldn't work in this game. You can totally make the phantoms fit into FNAF 6's gameplay if you wanted to. I mean, we have an entire game that's about throwing a bunch of animatronics with different gameplay mechanics at you. So I don't think that the idea that Scott couldn't have put the phantoms in the game makes sense. He very easily could have if they were ever relevant to Afton himself. So, the phantoms probably aren't coming from Afton. Okay, so what about the memorabilia? Well, it would certainly explain why the phantoms aren't in FNAF 6. If the memorabilia is haunted and responsible for projecting the phantoms, then there's really not much else to say about them. They probably disappear in the flames that engulf the rest of Fazbear's Fright at the end of the game. And on the off chance that they're still haunted after the fire, then, well, it kinda doesn't matter. None of it ends up in the FNAF 6 building to my knowledge, so they'd effectively be gone. I doubt that Henry even checks the building. He probably figures that the fire just destroyed everything. That explanation is entirely possible. I'm pretty sure it's what a lot of people have believed for a long time. However, between the fact that they seem to only be active when Springtrap is around, and the fact that they have Golden Freddy's mechanic, I just can't buy it. I just think that them being tied to the vengeful spirit is more likely. But if that is the case, then I have to wonder about FNAF 6 again. For some context, I think that the vengeful spirit is haunting William Afton himself, paralleling what the vengeful spirit does in the book series. I think that that happens at the end of Follow Me, which I'll get into my thoughts on later in the video, but for now, let's just follow this train of logic for a bit. If the vengeful spirit is attached to William Afton, then they're also present for FNAF 6, so why aren't the phantoms also in FNAF 6? The only answer that I have in my head for this is that the vengeful spirit knows that the plan for this building is to burn it down with everyone, including William Afton, still inside of it. This is exactly what the vengeful spirit wants to happen, so that they can start UCN as soon as possible. This would be a good reason for them to not attack Mike in this game, while still explaining why they seem to attack him in every other FNAF game that we see them in. Because this is the only game where Mike is giving the vengeful spirit exactly what they want, a way to finally kill William Afton. This, however, begs a pretty weird question. How do they know? How did the vengeful spirit find out about the plan to kill William Afton in FNAF 6? Well, I have an answer for that too. The call. All of the animatronics that we deal with in FNAF 6 were called to the building, and listening to what Scrap Baby has to say, it sounds like the call was made to sound like it was coming from someone on their side, the side of Scrap Baby and Afton. Most of her dialogue makes it sound like she thinks that she's in control, and that she knows who our employer is. It sounds like she even thinks that the person organizing all of this is Afton himself. She even goes on about how she wants to make him proud.
You don't really know who your employer is, do you? I heard your call. You played right into our hands. Did you really think that this job just fell out of the sky for you? No. This was a gift for us. You gathered them all together in one place, just like he asked you to. Now we can do what we were created to do, and be complete. I will make you proud, Daddy.
However, Afton wouldn't be fooled by that. He even says as much in FNAF 6. He knows that the call that he got was deceptive, but he showed up anyway, out of his own morbid curiosity.
What a deceptive calling. I knew it was a lie the moment I heard it, obviously, but it is intriguing nonetheless.
Afton knew what he was walking into. He knew that this was a trap, but he probably didn't know why. He knew he was walking into something that had the potential to be dangerous, and the absolute maniac showed up anyway, because of ego and intrigue. And considering that he was able to figure out that it was a trap, I think that it's reasonable to believe that the vengeful spirit, who is literally attached to him at all times, would also be able to figure this out. Keep in mind, the call that was sent out was probably made using Afton's voice, so the vengeful spirit should have been well aware of the fact that this didn't add up. So if they were able to piece together that this was a trap, then they wouldn't get in anyone's way and make it harder to accomplish what they wanted to do. With all of this in mind, I think that it's extremely plausible that the phantoms could have been created by the vengeful spirit. We know that the vengeful spirit creates hallucinations quite regularly, and we know that the phantoms have the exact same mechanic as Golden Freddy. This explanation would also explain why the phantoms aren't present in FNAF 6, and why the vengeful spirit doesn't attack us in this game, despite the fact that we know that they're present for when Afton dies due to UCN happening. It was all a part of the plan. They planned to wrap Afton up in a personalized purgatory, where he could suffer forever. Now, we've talked about the vengeful spirit quite a bit, haven't we? So, can we put a name to the title now? Well, no. I mean, we probably can, but I don't think that I want to try doing that yet. There are a few characters that the vengeful spirit could be, and everything that I've said about them in this video applies to every single one of those candidates. They're all blanket ideas that work no matter who the vengeful spirit is. So I'm not gonna spend time talking about the actual identity of them. If I'm doing this whole YouTube thing for long enough to make a big video on UCN, I'll talk about it there. But for now, let's just leave it at where we left it. What I can talk about now, though, is how I think that the vengeful spirit ended up getting attached to William Afton's soul. And it all starts with the minigame that we keep going back to every single night. Follow me. After every single shift, we find ourselves playing a minigame with one simple instruction. Follow me. Shadow Freddy wanders around the building, telling us to follow him to our inevitable dismantlement by the hands of William Afton. There are a few things to talk about with this building, like how there are 14 party hats. Or more importantly, how we're in the abandoned version of the FNAF 1 building. This map lines up perfectly, but there are some issues, like all of the rodents scurrying around, or the fact that the roof is leaking, or the fact that they sealed off the bathroom. Guess they want me to break Rule 4. Anyway, like I said, you spend the first 4 nights following Shadow Freddy as a different FNAF 1 animatronic, with a design that's ever so slightly off, and then, on the 5th night, you play as the spirit of a dead child. Shadow Freddy doesn't lure you anywhere this time, so you have to find your own way to the room that all the animatronics have been trying to get into for the past 4 nights. And this time, you're actually allowed to get into the room. In there, you find 4 other children spirits blocking the entrance, and William Afton panicking. He's specifically pointing at the spirit that we're controlling, with a crazed look in his eye, and he runs around the room trying to get away from us in particular. Kinda makes me wonder, does he recognize the spirit that we're controlling? I have a pretty hard time believing that, since they all look the goddamn same, but I think that it's worth pointing out. Anyway, after this scene, and after William accidentally gets himself killed, all of the spirits seem to disappear. Except, I don't think that they actually do. Considering we still have to do other steps in this game to get the quote-unquote good ending, I don't think that these spirits move on here at all. So, what becomes of them? I can't really speak for the 4 that are standing still, but I think that the one that we're controlling sticks around for a while. The other 4 spirits are presumably the ones that were in the animatronics, while the one that we're controlling now would be, well, the 5th one, Golden Freddy. I think that this is where Golden Freddy's vengeful spirit started to stick around William. Kind of like how in the FNAF movie, after William gets spring-locked, the spirit of Golden Freddy still sticks around, watching him and making sure he doesn't go anywhere. I think that when Afton eventually gets taken out and brought to Fazbear's Fright, the vengeful spirit attaches himself onto Afton and tags along with him. This feels like the prerequisite to UCN ever happening, otherwise there's no explanation as to how this spirit got there. And it's necessary to explain everything that I think about the phantoms, so, you know. Speaking of explaining everything about the animatronics, let's talk about Shadow Freddy. What's he doing here? For a long time, a popular theory was that Shadow Freddy was being controlled by William Afton to lure the animatronics toward the safe room that they can't enter, so that Afton can run out and dismantle them. Interesting idea, there's just one problem. It requires William to have the ability to control a projection. William's capable of a lot of things in this series, but this is not one of them. So, what is Shadow Freddy doing here? Well, if it's a projection, then it's probably the vengeful spirit doing it. I think that the vengeful spirit is trying to get the animatronics to get themselves dismantled. That way the actual spirits can get into the room and trap Afton. This would also explain why Shadow Freddy doesn't show up on the final night, because we're playing as the vengeful spirit here. no need to lure ourselves over here. That's why there are no instructions. I understand that a lot of people still think that Shadow Freddy is William due to the fact that Shadow Freddy has that familiar purple coloring that's always been used on the Aftons, but I just don't think that it's something that Afton is physically capable of doing here. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about the part of this minigame that I've grown to hate ever since starting with this video. The hints. On your first 4 runs through this minigame, you can find hints that lead you to minigames that you can activate during the main gameplay. It's worth pointing out that these hints reappear as minigames in FNAF World, but I'm not going to talk about that in detail unless I make a big FNAF World video, which, God, I don't want to do that. Anyway, let's talk about why I hate these hints so much. They don't make sense. They shouldn't be here. These hints obviously weren't there in the abandoned FNAF 1 building, which means that we're left with just one of 2 options. The easy option is that these are just meta. Scott just put these here and told us what to do without them pertaining to the event of the minigame. And honestly, I would love it if this were the case. It would be so much easier than the alternative. Unfortunately, I kind of think that the answer is the alternative. The cursed alternative to that is that these hints are there and are being shown to our player character, who uses them to activate the rest of the minigames. But if that's the case, then that would make Follow Me an actual playable arcade game in universe. And I kind of think that this is the case. It would mean that there's someone that's actually giving us the hints to follow up on so that we can activate the rest of these minigames. Presumably Charlie or Cassidy. Cassidy would be more interesting, but I think that Charlie is a bit more likely, considering the fact that giving kids their happiest day is kind of her entire thing. But speaking of the other minigames, let's talk about the rest of them that we see in FNAF 3. First off, BB's Air Adventure. To get into this minigame, you double-click on a picture of Balloon Boy that you can find on one of the cameras with 5 balloons. And I find this interesting. Not the mechanic for getting there, but the picture itself. 2 of those 5 balloons have a child holding onto them, while the other 3 don't. This immediately makes me think of something that we actually see in the minigame. When you go through the wall and fall all the way down, you stumble upon a tree with 3 blacked out balloon boys underneath it. Since they're blacked out and have tear streaks flowing all the way down, I'm inclined to believe that these are supposed to be dead. And since there are 3 of them, I'm immediately reminded of the 3 balloons that weren't being held by a child on this poster. Is there a connection there? Well, maybe, but I don't really know how it works. I can't think of a group of 5 people where 3 of them died but 2 of them didn't. Furthermore, the 2 balloons that are being held are green and purple. This personally makes me think of Charlie, green for the wristband and security puppet, and one of the Aftons for purple, probably the crying child. Maybe this is supposed to represent them? They are the 2 souls that are immediately present for Happiest Day, but then who would the other 3 be? The numbers kinda just don't work out. I don't know if there's anything actually here, but I wanted to bring it up because I find it a little bit interesting. Speaking of interesting and of purple balloons, Balloon Boy's design is pretty curious. Not only does he have a purple balloon for some reason, but his color scheme is off. He has the same color scheme as Nightmare Balloon Boy for some reason. I couldn't begin to tell you why this is. This might just be another case of Scott doing things differently for some reason. Kinda like how the animatronics in Follow Me look slightly off. Anyway, there's not much else to talk about here. The child you eventually find here wears the Freddy mask when you find him in Happiest Day later. The only other thing that might be worth mentioning is the implication that comes with grabbing the balloon here and having it affect one of the other minigames, but I'm not emotionally ready to think about that. Let's move on to the next minigame, Mangle's Quest. There's a lot less to talk about here, at least for now. I'm gonna come back to this one later in the video. You'll see why. For now, all you need to know is that the shadow puppet is here, and for some reason is in the same pose as the crying child at the end of FNAF 4. The only other thing that you need to know is that this is the only minigame where you don't actually give anyone cake. You actually take a cake from this one. We'll be getting into that a bit later. For now, we're gonna skip past Chica's party for a little bit and talk about Stage 01. There's not really much to talk about in this one. It's the only minigame where we don't play as a FNAF 2 animatronic, which is a bit interesting. Makes me think it's a reference to how the FNAF 2 location more than likely used to be Fredbear's Family Diner, but I don't think that it's definitive proof or anything. Apart from that, yeah, there's not much. You can find a room where there's only 2 kids instead of 3, which feels like a pretty obvious reference to the MCI, and that is more or less it. The kid you get from the end of this minigame is the one wearing the Foxy mask. Then, there's the minigame. There's even less to talk about here. The only thing that I can really think to mention about it is the fact that the child you see at the end of the minigame looks noticeably darker than the rest of the kids we've seen in this game. Does this mean anything? Almost certainly, but I have nothing. Maybe it has to do with the fact that we're controlling a shadow animatronic, which is just a noticeably darker version of an existing animatronic? I don't know. I've got nothing, but I wanted to bring it up. Also, the child we save here is the one in the body mask. Now for the big one. Happiest Day. Happiest Day is the most important minigame in all of FNAF, and as I'm sure you can imagine, there's a lot to talk about. Let's start out with the first thing that you see, the kids. There are a total of 10 kids in this minigame, not including the one that we play as. 5 of them are in the last room, with 4 of those 5 being the ones that we saved in the other minigames. As for the other 5 children here, well, they're pretty weird. Dead kids have always been grayed out in this series, but these guys, they're not grayed out. They're fully colored in, and they're wearing masks that we don't recognize. Nobody has ever had a good answer for who these kids are supposed to be. I had a little bit of an idea in a short that I uploaded previously, but I kind of disagree with what I said now. In the short, I said that the mask that these kids wear represent the temporary costumes that Fazbear Entertainment was having the employees put on after the Springlocking incident. However, if that were the case, then the Happiest Day receiver would have to have been alive for when that happens in 1985. And I just don't think that that's the case. Every bone in my body is telling me that the person waiting at the end of this table in this minigame is the crying child that died at the end of FNAF 4 in 1983. This is mostly due to the theme of reflections in the survival logbook, and the fact that the map for Happiest Day is literally a reflection of the Fredbear's Family Diner that we see the crying child die in toward the end of FNAF 4. There's also the fact that on page 33 of the logbook, which is another coupon page, we have the caption, "Take a bite out of fun on your next birthday." And on this page, we have a coupon literally titled Happiest Day. Taking a bite on your next birthday, and that birthday being referred to as a happiest day, feels a little too on the nose. I can't believe that this is just a big coincidence. This has to be intentional on Scott's part. The other prime candidate for this character is Cassidy. And while I think that the concept of Cassidy being the Happiest Day receiver is interesting, I don't really see it. Not only because of the whole reflections thing, but because one of the core pieces of evidence for Cassidy receiver, the artwork of the puppet handing a cake to a small girl with a similar color scheme to Golden Freddy, is fundamentally flawed. I'll get into why that is a little bit later, but for now, just follow me on my train of logic. The Happiest Day receiver is none other than FNAF 4's crying child, which would mean that the connection that I made in the short falls flat on its face, because that would require the Happiest Day receiver to be alive in 1985, which the crying child isn't. So as for who these kids are, I've kinda got nothing. Maybe they're meant to represent the 5 kids from the neighborhood that the crying child can interact with in FNAF 4, but there's nothing they have in common with each other apart from the fact that there's 5 of them. So, yeah, I'm kinda back to having nothing on them. Now, let's get back to the receiver of this minigame, the kid that's here from the very start. What I find the most interesting about this child is that you can't just give them a cake right away. You need to go through everything else and get the rest of the kids there before you can give them anything. On the note of these kids, the order that they appear in probably doesn't matter that much. The order that you'll probably see them come in is Freddy, Chica, Foxy, and Bonnie. This is because that's the order that the game, for the most part, forces you into acquiring them. However, technically, you can find the kid that puts on the Freddy mask whenever you want to, since you can access BB's Air Adventure on multiple nights in this game. Unlike Chica's Party, Stage L1, and... Anyway, when you bring all of these kids together, the Happiest Day receiver puts on a golden Freddy mask. And then, all of the kids fade away, their masks slowly falling to the ground. The puppet's mask falls noticeably slower than the rest of the masks there, which is probably due to the fact that they want to make sure that everyone else is okay before moving on, which is a very Charlie-coded thing to do. However, even more interesting than that is the fact that the Golden Freddy mask also falls just a little bit slower than the rest of them, almost as if the person wearing the mask is hesitant to move on. But why would that be? Isn't this a good thing? Well, I don't know if they actually do want to move on. Which brings me to the one minigame that I have yet to really talk about. Chica's Party. Most of you are probably pretty confused. Why am I saving this for last of all things? Well, that's simple, because Chica's Party is hiding a secret. I actually wouldn't be surprised if 90% of the people watching this video that don't make FNAF theories didn't know about this. After getting the game's good ending, you can replay the minigames from the extras menu, and if you do, you can fall through the floor before giving a cake to the child, where you're brought to a room that you cannot access normally. I didn't know about this until it was shown to me on a stream a few months ago. It's such a weird secret. Why can you only see it if you've already beaten the game and try accessing it from the extras menu? Well, actually, that might have to do with what happens here. You see, when you get down here, a shadow cupcake starts following you around. And if you go to the right, you'll find 4 other shadow cupcakes completely stationary. I think that this is trying to tell us something. First of all, there's something that I want to point out. On Cam 4, there's a 1 in 100 chance that the Toy Bonnie drawing is replaced by a drawing of Mr. Cupcake. And there's a 1 in 10,000 chance of it being a golden Mr. Cupcake. And I think that this golden Mr. Cupcake can be seen in Chica's Party. I think that this is the cupcake that follows you around. And if this is a golden cupcake, then I'm inclined to believe that it's meant to represent none other than Golden Freddy, which would make the rest of these characters the other MCI children. And since this can only be seen after going through Happiest Day and getting the good ending to the game, this might be something that happens after FNAF 3 chronologically, or more specifically, after the events of Happiest Day. What if this is the reason that Golden Freddy's mask falls slower than the rest of them? What if the reason that they're hesitant to move on is because they don't want to? What if they want to stick around, even after the rest of the MCI kids pass on? But hold on, that doesn't even make any sense. I mean, we see them get a cake just like all of the other kids, don't we? So why don't they move on? Well, that brings me back to what I was saying earlier when we were talking about Cassidy Receiver. Like I said, there's a drawing of the puppet giving a cake to a young girl with Golden Freddy's color scheme. There's just one issue here. An issue that I haven't seen anyone else bring up. The cake is wrong. While every other character in this game gets the same cake that you pick up at the end of Mangle's quest, the Happiest Day receiver gets this gaster-ass, copies or monochrome-ass cake instead. Why is this? Well, I have a theory as to why. It's time to talk about the greatest theory of our time. The theory that sounded like such a complete meme until I accidentally rediscovered it while researching for this video. It's time for Glue Victim. Okay, what the hell is a glue victim? It's kinda like Shatter Victim, but inverted. Shatter Victim is the theory that the crying child's soul was scattered throughout all of the FNAF 1 animatronics. And because of that, bringing them back together in FNAF 3's Happiest Day is what allows the crying child to move on. I always thought that this was a cool theory, but there's one glaring issue with it. The how. How did the crying child's soul get scattered to animatronics that weren't even in use yet? There was never an answer for that I personally enjoyed, and as a result, I've been pretty on the fence about Shatter Victim recently. And then I rediscovered Glue Victim, and everything changed. The discovery started in Mangle's quest. At the end of this minigame, you pick up a multi-layered, colored-in cake. You can give this cake to the MCI kids, but the game won't let you give it to the crying child waiting for you in Happiest Day. It reminds me of how if you walk up to the MCI kids before getting the cake from Mangle's quest, nothing happens. This tells me that we don't have the gray cake yet that we give to them. But that's weird, because we never pick up a gray cake in this game. So why are we suddenly able to give it to the crying child at the end? What changes? Well, let's retrace our steps a little bit. You pick up this first cake in Mangle's quest. This is the only midnight minigame without a dead child in it. Or is it? We don't exactly have a dead kid in this minigame, but we do have the shadow puppet. And he's in the same pose as the crying child is at the end of FNAF 4, on his knees, crying. This is his minigame. This cake belongs to the representation of the shadow puppet, the crying child. We are taking his cake and giving it to the MCI kids instead. And once we've done that, once we've split his cake up and given it to everyone else, we give him what's left. Whenever we see a dead kid in FNAF, they're grayed out, drained of color. So, we can associate gray with death, the absence of life. FNAF 3's minigames are about giving the colored-in cake, representing life, to the MCI kids. And once we've given the cake to everyone, we give the crying child what's left of it. There's no life left to give. We gave CC's life to the MCI kids. The crying child's soul didn't get shattered when he died. Instead, we used his soul, his life, as the glue to bring all of the rest of the MCI kids together. It's the opposite of Shatter Victim. We aren't using the MCI kids to bring the crying child together, we're using the crying child to bring the MCI kids together. I don't know if this makes sense yet. This brings the crying child being the vengeful spirit into the spotlight, which I'm not ready to talk about yet, but I do think that there's some form of merit to it. What I do know, however, is that this is an interesting basis for a theory, and I'd like to make a video dedicated to Glue Victim in the future, using any feedback I get from this segment in it. So if you got any ideas or feedback on Glue Victim, and any finds from the other games, or any other ways to interpret what I said, leave it in the comments. I'll try to get back to this before the end of the year. But for now, I'm gonna wrap things up. Thanks for watching. I didn't expect this video to be nearly as long as it was. I fully expected this video to be a bit of a shorter pit stop before the catastrophe that will be the FNAF 4 video. But as it turns out, FNAF 3 has a lot more than I gave it credit for. And honestly, I'm pretty happy about that. This was the most recent game in the series when I first started to really get into FNAF, so finding so much to talk about in it kinda brings a smile to my face. Even though I'm pretty sure a lot of the people watching this are gonna think that I'm insane for some of the things that I said, but just like always, I'm confident in the things that I've presented here today. If you have any thoughts, I implore you to leave them in the comments. I'm gonna try to do better about responding to them from now on, but there's a lot of people here nowadays, so it's a little bit of a task. Nevertheless, I'd like to interact with people more. Anyway, I'll stop rambling. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. And with that, I'm gonna let my voice rest because I've been recording for the past hour and a half. Stay tuned for FNAF 4 later this year. Take it easy.